Batman is the world's greatest detective, hence the nickname. As such, in this video, I'm going to go over some methods and practices to improve your detective skills. Before I begin, if you enjoy this type of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And make sure to check your local laws, as you may be breaking some if you interrupt an investigation, which I do not recommend. The first is actively being aware of your surroundings, taking in information. Unlike Batman, most people won't be able to remember every single detail. As such, it's good to take notes of key details and also have a camera that is constantly recording. Something like a spy cam, so it's discreet but is good enough to pick on both audio and visuals, preferably in color. The reason for the notes is for witness statements or key details that you find important to the case, while the camera is for a less biased viewpoint. This is because the key points that you write are from your perspective, which is going to be affected by implicit biases, which are unintentional and automatic, but affect our judgment and decisions, including our judgment on what is important and what is not so important. So you may accidentally ignore an unlikely but critical piece of info. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but this should in theory reduce the chances of it happening. Then when reviewing the footage and the notes at a later time, try and be aware of any biases you may have formed, and by recognizing them, you can reduce the effect. Now, noticing these biases may be difficult and requires practice. Next is the fine line between using inductive and deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is using specific premises to form general conclusions. So they can be logically true, but they're not always realistically true. Where deductive reasoning is using general premises to form specific conclusions. So they're both realistic and logically true. For example, in the case of inductive reasoning, the premise is that all known fish species in a genus have yellow fins. The general conclusion is that any newly discovered species in said genus will most likely have yellow fins. This is a forecasted guess though. Deductive, on the other hand, is I am lactose intolerant and people with lactose intolerance get sick when consuming dairy. So the conclusion is, I will get sick if I drink this milkshake that has dairy in it. A specific conclusion based off of an existing theory. There is a great video from Trick Theory on Batman's detective skills that goes into detail on inductive reasoning, and a video from Infinity Learn Class 9 and 10, which compares inductive versus deductive reasoning. The first video also goes into observation, which I've already covered to some extent, along with skepticism and probability thinking, which I'll be addressing to some level later in this video. You also want to follow proper police procedures in the case of crime scenes, making sure to secure the crime scene, separate and talk to witnesses, collect evidence, and analyze said evidence to see potential patterns. When talking to witnesses, while valuable info, they are not the most reliable, as testimonies can be corrupted or inaccurate based off of implicit biases, or that they were in high-stress scenarios, so specific details may be missed. It can also be corrupted by what they can and can't see, depending on the position of where they were standing or sitting. If there is a difference in time from the event and when questioned, it can also make it harder as well, or purposely inaccurate to mislead the investigation. As such, it's important to be skeptical of testimonies and in general to be skeptical of most if not all of the evidence, so you don't latch onto one specific theory. You want to separate witnesses when trying to get this type of info. You want to ask specific questions to get as much valuable information as possible. A PDF from the National Criminal Justice Reference Service. Some of the recommendations include asking open-ended questions like what can you tell me about the car, to have a potentially unlimited response. You also want to add close-end questions, which are more specific, like what color was the car, while trying to avoid leading questions that may confuse the witness from the original memory, like was the car red? I'll drop a link of the PDF down below if you're interested in more details. You'd also want to build a rapport or bond with the witnesses to get them to open up by showing certain level of empathy, kindness, understanding, respect. And I would recommend reading the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Back to the crime scene, you want to search for evidence in a calculated manner to avoid missing potential clues. The website forensicarticles.com gives a couple of searching methods, such as a zone search pattern, the link method, line search pattern, etc. You want to take photographs as well and use the spy cam footage to help recreate the area at a later time, along with collecting both obvious evidence like a bloody knife or the door having signs of forced entry, but also less obvious pieces of evidence just in case it's a valuable piece of information. You would also want to consult specialists for certain pieces of evidence, as they can assist, such as a forensic entomologist can use insects that have congregated on a body to determine the time of death based off of the life cycles of said insect and the type of insects that there are inside or around. Now, when analyzing the collected evidence and testimonies and such, you want to be careful to not fall into apophenia, I believe it's pronounced, which is the tendency to perceive a connection or meaningful pattern between unrelated or random things. The brain may make these random connections and you may have a false conclusion. Instead, try and think in probabilities by creating multiple hypotheses of viable occurrences and try your best to avoid both personal feelings in the case and any implicit biases. I like to imagine this as a pie chart, which you can also create, of the labeled hypotheses that you have made, and also percentages, which will always be changing as new evidence is gathered or previous evidence is disregarded. Though this, and most if not all, of what I have spoken so far will require practice. As such, along with doing different puzzles to keep your mind sharp, you would also want to try and do escape rooms. While not the same as a real crime scene, with one example of many being that all the clues are inside this space, however, it can let you practice some of the things that I've mentioned so far, like inducive/deducive reasoning, searching methods, asking witnesses questions if they also have actors, etc. It would also be good to keep up to date on current events and always be learning, so you can have a familiarity over a large amount of info that may come into play sometime during an investigation, though it is not always assured. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see a more detailed video on some of the specifics, like taking witness testimonies or crime scene procedure, comment down below. And make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this video and hit the join button for $2.99 a month and become a member and support the channel.